Time now to bring in our political panel, former Liberal advisor, now with DPG Advisory, David Gazard. And fresh off the plane from that B20 summit in Bali, former Labor advisor, now Fitzpatrick Advisory, Eamon Fitzpatrick. Eamon, the meeting with the Chinese president, it's been some time coming, 3 years since Scott Morrison had informal talks on the sidelines of the G20 in Osaka, 6 years since a formal bilateral. So it's quite a thaw. Will it lead to any substantive change in the relationship?
Thanks, Kieran. And let me just say this. It was an absolute honour to be there to watch how much the dynamic has shifted as far as Australia goes and our relationships with trade partners, other world leaders. So I think this Xi meeting really is the icing on the cake because I don't think we can expect things will change overnight, but definitely a clear signal sent by both leaders that things will improve over time. I think it also reflects our general standing. I mean, we had a very, very open reception at the B20 from all of Indonesia's business leaders. It was and the Prime Minister led our biggest ever trade delegation to Indonesia ever. So definitely lots of talk around the event in terms of how much our standing has changed. And I think we will begin to see, in some cases, faster change in terms of our big partners regionally, such as Indonesia. But I think the China meeting, in fact, those two encounters, I think we can take away some very positive signals overall.
David Gazard, it's clear, as the former Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull said today, that the Chinese president has seen this change of government as an off-ramp to their coercive behaviour and bullying in recent times.
I don't agree with Malcolm on that. I think this is a change in attitude from China towards the Western world. There has been a thawing in the relationship with the US. Australia certainly was probably at the vanguard in leading Western democracies to sort of stand up against China. I agree with Greg Sheridan, who was on a little bit earlier, talking about how the wolf warrior diplomacy efforts of China against Western Europe, the US and Australia has failed.
So do you think this would have happened if, regardless of who was in power here?
Yeah, I think so. There was a necessity for China to change its tack vis-a-vis the rest of the world, not just Australia. Australia, though, had borne the brunt of trade sanctions and tariffs, and it was good that the Australian government, despite the changes in leadership, have kept up the same rhetoric against China. It was great to see our Prime Minister go up there and tell China that it had to dismantle its trade barriers against Australia before we would entertain any thoughts of a change. So we have been very consistent and probably led the world through the G7 and through lobbying at the EU and the OECD for Western democracies to stand up to China. China hates being dismissed worldwide. China hates having its reputation damaged across the world. So I think this is a bowing of the inevitable because the world has stood up to China.
Eamon Fitzpatrick, when the Prime Minister returns home and the Treasurer off the back of this summit season, there's no prize for guessing what the focus will need to be over coming months. It's cost of living. Today, the wage price index rose 1% in the September quarter, 3.1% annually. Some growth, but still a gap with inflation, obviously in such a high inflationary environment we're in right now. But that's where the main game is in a political sense for the Prime Minister, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there's a whole range of challenges they need to sort out. Cost of living, wages, energy prices, chief among them. And it's clear when you talk to people in government, we aren't alone. These are the conversations they're having with their counterparts right across the G20. Everyone has the same issues. But you're right, Kieran, as soon as they are back on Sunday, all focus goes back to addressing the domestic agenda. I see Tony Burkup today talking about all of those workplace relations issues and those laws. And, I think all of those things go toward creating a stronger economy ultimately. Trade and our trade ties are a huge part of that, as well as what we do around power prices, because without getting those under control, we can't do the manufacturing we would like to do. And we can't get our innovation capability up to where it needs to be.
And David Gazard, while what we've been talking about is very important, those international ties and connections, as Eamon says, the trade implications as well, this government will want in the final sitting fortnight, as of next week, to wrap up the year, laser focused on that issue of people hurting in terms of cost of living, rate rises and so on.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, they've tried to make their IR bill one that suits the purposes of the lower paid, but with each and every day we're seeing that this has the ripple effect that spreads out across the broader business community. To me, presenting a bill that was 230 pages and then having 30 pages of amendments in the last sitting week, which meant that the independents and the Greens wanted more time to look at it, is going to mean that it's probably going to take more than 2 weeks, the last 2 sitting weeks of the year, to resolve this issue. And as we know, it's only the first stage of IR as an omnibus bill. So I wouldn't expect a quick fix on wages coming off the back of the last 2 weeks of Parliament.
David Gazard, Eamon Fitzpatrick, gents, we will see you both here in Canberra next week during that sitting week. Thanks as always.